Welcome back to Lawyers and Libations. No, it's been a little bit of a hiatus. It was February, which takes a while. And so now we're on episode 33. And every day the world's burning down and more shit's happening. And I'm this close from throwing myself in front of a UPS truck. But we are not here today to talk about that. We are here because we have one of our most esteemed colleagues, Natalie Woodward, who's also been on here before and talked to you about personal injury law and being a female in law and all of those things. However, in Georgia, we have a massive movement for tort reform put forward by Governor Kemp. And so we have brought her on today as being on the executive committee for the Georgia Trial Lawyers Association to help the layperson understand a little bit about what's going on with tort reform. Natalie, thank you for coming to see us.
I am so happy to be here.
It'd be cooler if it were under better circumstances.
Better circumstances would be preferable. This is a piece of legislation that was dropped pretty close to the beginning of the session. It is 18 pages. It deals with about 8 different areas of the law, 8 or 9, depending on how you count. So this, the version that we're dealing with, there was a version that passed out of the Senate. It had some minor changes from what Governor Kemp had put out originally, and it went over to the House, where it was expected to be assigned to the House Judiciary Committee, which has a large number of lawyers on that House Judiciary Committee.
You mean that possibly could understand some of the language,
right,
which is why it would go to the Judiciary Committee?
Yes, and so the expectation is that what passed out of the Senate would most likely get fixed, tweaked at House Judiciary, and then when it got over to the House, to everyone's surprise, Speaker Burns did not elect to send it to the House Judiciary Committee. Instead, he sent it to Rules, which, of course, does not have as many lawyers. Mm-hmm. And there was some pushback about that, so he actually created a special committee.
How many lawyers are on that committee?
There are 4.
Out of how many people?
I think there's probably 12 on the committee itself. Stacey Evans, he put Stacey Evans on
Love
it.
Love her. She's amazing.
Stan Gunner on it, who used to be a judge. So it definitely has some folks on there who would understand. But it is obviously a predominantly Republican committee, as they all are, because the Republicans control the House and the Senate and the governor's mansion.
Georgia.
Which, this is really not a partisan issue. The folks who are opponents of it are Republicans and Democrats, so it's really not partisan.
And so I would imagine you're spending a bunch of time at the Capitol. Would you mind just kind of explaining how the process works so that people kind of understand how it's proposed, where it starts, and then how it ends up in the different committees?
Right. So I have learned a lot in this process. Once I began doing legislative work for GTLA, I learned a lot about the process that I did not know, that I probably should have learned in like civics class, in like high school. And my political science degree, you would think that I would have known these things. But the actual process, so Senator John Kennedy, who's a senator from Macon, he carried the bill, which meant that it was the governor's office really wrote it, and then Senator Kennedy as sponsor. So it was assigned originally to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and that's where the hearings were on it originally. It had to be voted out of the Senate Judiciary, which it did. It voted out, I think, 6-5, it voted out, straight party vote. And so once it goes out of the committee, then it has to go to the Senate floor, and it will pass, and it passed the Senate floor, again, party line vote. Once that happens, because there's 2 chambers, it has to go over to the other chamber. So if a bill starts as introduced in the House, then once it passes the House, it goes over to the Senate.
That's on crossover day.
Yes, it has to be done by crossover day. Mm-hmm. So anything that is going to cross over
needs to go before that date.
Right, that's
the
March
deadline. 6th, right?
Right. Mm-hmm. And once something crosses over, it gets assigned to whatever committee. If it's in the Senate, the lieutenant governor decides what committee. If it's in the House, Speaker of the House decides what committee. And the committees are important because depending on the folks who are in the committee, they're going to have an extra level of expertise about the issues. So one thing that can kind of happen when folks are being strategic is that if they believe they have a bill that could potentially be chopped up or more editing happening than they want, they will purposely not send it to the committee that has the most information about that subject. And that's not unique to just legal issues, but
strategery, political strategery.
Yes. So the problem is that if they make any changes to it when it gets over to the second chamber, if they make any changes to it, it has to go back to where it came from to see, does that, for Senate, for example, do they agree to the change? Mm-hmm. And if they agree, then great. Then it's passed both, right? If they actually have to vote on it in the Senate, but they agree. If they don't agree with the change, then they make what's called a conference committee where they pick 3 folks from the House, 3 folks from the Senate, all get in a room and try to figure it out and come up with some kind of compromise bill that becomes the substitution. And then that substitution bill has to be voted on Senate and House. That's why as this process moves forward between now and sine die, which is the last day of the session, which is April 4th, it will get fast forward button hit. And so a lot of things will probably start happening between Tuesday and sine die.
And so it sounds like today, there are no hearings today or Monday.
Right.
And so do we anticipate there'll be hearings again on Tuesday in rules?
Right. So the idea is that at the earliest, because it has to at least be voted out of rules yet, and that has not happened. So there's been 3 days of hearings in the special committee, and they have to vote it out. So the one possibility is that they, between now and Tuesday, will have some amendments to the bill. Another possibility is that they call it to a vote and it passes by party lines potentially out of the committee. The question then would be what would happen at the House, and that's kind of anyone's guess.
So we have a fascinating thing going on right now where tort reform is being pushed here in Georgia by our governor, Governor Kemp, who every year has said Georgia is the best place to do businesses. So the insurance companies are actually having record-breaking profits all the way through. And what he's hanging his hat on for the reason of needing this tort reform is these, quote, runaway juries and these runaway verdicts that are really just jacking up your premiums. 2 things about that are completely false. One is that by pressing forward with tort reform, you're going to have any sort of reduction on your premiums. In fact, when they've questioned them in the committees, they've gone eerily silent on it. And they said, well, I mean, we can't really say that that's going to happen. Well, shocking. So they're going to make more money.
Well, and in fact, not to interrupt, but didn't they also would not agree to an amendment that said that premiums would not be raised?
Correct.
So
they did.
Clearly, there's no actual intent to lower premiums or keep them at a certain level.
Whoever called their bluff on that, I love that. I love
awesome.
that lawmaker. So that's number 1. Number 2 is, again, the only time you have these, quote, runaway jury verdicts are when the insurance company has completely fucked up along the way and you have either several people dead or several people grievously injured, and the insurance company's been like, nah, we're not going to pay you within policy limits, right? Because if you actually pay within the policy limits, that case is done. So by the time that they're getting popped on these huge cases, it's because it's 5 years of insurance company shenanigans who have been denying it and not making reasonable offers, which is why then you've got a jury that comes in and goes, wow, if this were my child or my mother or my, grandmother, whatever, I would want this to be the case because the insurance company acted in bad faith.
And policy limits, and I'm sure y'all have explained this before, but for folks that I guess are listening that aren't lawyers, so what that means is that if you've got an insurance policy and your insurance policy has limits of $100,000, so that means you're covered up to $100,000 for a car wreck. If, and I know you know this, if you get into a wreck and I, as the plaintiff's lawyer, demand that the insurance company pay me that $100,000 and they don't,
policy's open.
Then whatever the jury gives me is what I can potentially get, not automatically get, potentially get.
No.
But if I don't at least send that offer to say, hey, I'm willing to accept the $100,000, then I can't get anything. So I have to give them a chance to
pay within the policy limit.
And it's interesting because I've certainly noticed a trend as of late where even with like a $25,000 auto policy, which is pretty easy to hit with just an ER bill
Medicals,
and like a few MRIs, right? How many times the insurance company is like,
nah,
nope, not paying you $25,000, even if you've got $20,000 in meds, we'll pay you $10,000. And that's why these cases, even small ones, end up being tried, not because
nobody wants to go forward and spend the damn time to try these cases that are like $25,000 in meds. It's absurd. But if you're not going to pay fairly, then it's like, all right, go get popped.
Yeah.
The other thing that's happening too is that, and I've talked to some friends who are on the other side who do insurance defense work. So, the competition to get the business from the insurance companies is pretty, it's a pretty high level of competition. So what ends up happening is that the firms are, making deals to lower their hourly rates or max out their amounts.
Rebecca and I both did defense.
This is why I no longer do it. Yeah.
And so the what that's meant is that the only way the insurance defense firms can really make a profit is if they do high quantity.
High volume.
And so they get, 500 cases sent to them, and they're just missing some stuff. Some stuff is just inevitably falling through the cracks. And so you'll have a $25,000 demand on a death case or some kind of really serious injury case. And if you don't respond in 30 days and send the check, then you've blown your opportunity. And sometimes these things are just literally getting missed because they're overwhelmed because the insurance companies are trying to take advantage of the competition and constantly, at some point these folks are making way less an hour than they should be making.
Oh, for sure.
Oh, yeah. That's why when I was doing comp defense, they kept cutting, our rates kept getting lower and lower and lower to the point that I was like, why not even go to law school to get paid this an hour? And also I didn't like what I was doing, and I was having to take stupid positions.
Yeah.
And I was like, you know what? I actually don't mind injured people. I think I'll switch sides.
I would really like to help people instead. So here we ended up. I want you to go through a few points because we're trying to make this, which is the reason why we didn't do our normal fun opening. We're not, having drinks and partying and doing all the things like we normally do when we have these podcasts.
Like a wake.
This is more like we're going to be quick about this so we can give you the points if you're interested, which you very much should because it's going to affect you. If you live in Georgia, if this actually passes the way that it's written, things that you can call your legislators and tell them about of why you oppose it and why they need to oppose it. So
the two biggest things that I think will affect all Georgians and certainly 95% of plaintiffs' lawyers is the collateral source part. And what that means is that in Georgia, and this is different in every single state, has its own kind of way they deal with this, but in Georgia, what we do is if your bill is $25,000 from the hospital, for example, if you get in a car wreck, it's $25,000 bill. When you go to court, what you've showed to the jury is that $25,000 bill. Now, in reality, depending on the kind of insurance you've had, Blue Cross, Aetna, Medicare, Medicaid, TRICARE, the actual amount paid on that bill would be different for each individual person based on whatever their policy is.
Right.
So 10 different people may have a paid out number that's 10 different numbers, ranging from $5,000 to $5,500 to $6,000 to $3,000.
Or if you're a veteran on TRICARE and you served your country, and you get into the same accident as Joe did up the street, who doesn't have health insurance, so his bill is $25,000, but TRICARE paid $750 because it's negotiated that rate with the hospital.
Right.
What happens to him?
So what would
the
happen
veteran, the lovely veteran that served the
that
country.
Under the bill as written, the jury would get to see that the actual amount paid was $750. And the reason why that's important is because a lot of times and juries do this and it makes sense why they do it. They'll have a correlation between whatever the pain and suffering they award based on the medical bills. And so that's because juries are looking at this and going, I don't know, I know they had this amount days in the hospital or whatever. How do we find a number for pain and suffering? That's the enlightened conscience of the jury. Okay, we'll just triple the medical bills. Well, if the medical bills they're tripling are
$5,000 instead of $175,000,
yes.
That's a problem.
Yes, so that means it would probably end up being, as my best estimation is that every injury case would probably be worth between 50 and 75 or 80% less than what it's worth right now, unless you were uninsured. And if you're uninsured, you're fine, because if
that's
you're uninsured,
what I was going to say.
Yes, if you're uninsured and the bill is the bill because you don't have health insurance, then you get to put in the full bill. And so that is why I think it's backwards. It's letting the jury know about your health insurance. And the reason why that's unfair is because on the flip side, we can't tell the jury that, hey, Rebecca here is sitting here as named as Rebecca on the lawsuit, but really it's State Farm and they're her lawyer and she's not paid a dime of this lawyer. She's not going to have to pay a dime of this verdict. She's paid, car insurance premiums, and so that's covered and everything. So we're not allowed to tell the jury that, but they're allowed to tell the jury, hey, Natalie's got Blue Cross Blue Shield, and
well, I think it just messes up the complete uniformity across the board. Everybody's on the same level playing field if you get to see what those providers actually bill.
Sure.
If you see what's actually paid, everybody changes.
Right.
And actually the most insured are the ones that get screwed the most.
yes.
Yeah, it's almost like you get rewarded by not having health insurance.
It's absolutely true that you get rewarded by not having health insurance.
Which we should not mean. Granted, the health insurance system in and of itself is a whole other
it's all
corrupt
terrible.
beast, but you should be insured.
Right, which is an interesting position for folks to be taking who I think, as a general rule, I grew up a Republican in a lot of ways. I still am a Republican. I still have guns. I'm still fiscally conservative. So I think it's an interesting position, which as from this party that typically is historically been big on being reliant, and that is interesting that now that it basically the folks who were completely uninsured would be put into a better
position. Mm-hmm. Okay, so we've got collateral source rule.
That is
really
one.
bad.
Yeah.
Okay.
The second part that I think is really, really bad is the negligent security portion, and it's negligent security is a misnomer. What it really is just if you are anywhere in Georgia and a third party hurts you, so you get shot at a convenience store, you get kidnapped from the gas station, you're in a club and there's bad security and somebody pulls out a gun, anything that deals with folks being injured on a property from the wrongful conduct of another person.
Also apartment complexes,
right. You name it, daycares, nursing homes, anything where a third party may come into contact, like with your kid, with your parent, whatever. This bill basically grants blanket immunity for all owners for anything that happens on their property if it's done by a third party. And the reason why that's important is because as it stands right now, you only have liability now if Sarah comes onto my property and does something, I am only liable if I have failed to do something that I should have done. If I didn't do background checks on employees, if I had bad security, if I knew people were coming on my property and didn't do anything about it, right? And then something happens to a customer, then I can be liable, not guaranteed, but I can be liable. That has basically been gutted in Georgia, which I think is scary as it relates to, we know that people are incentivized, me included, to do the right thing when you have risk associated with your conduct or failure to act. And the idea that we would be insulating everywhere.
Give us an example or two. Give us an example with I don't know, child molestation or drunk drivers of teenagers leaving your house, right? That you've provided the boost.
Right. So
what would happen there?
There's a blanket immunity for anything that happens in a residence caused by a third party.
Oh, that makes me sick.
So
it'll make you want to throw up.
If your kids go over to spend the night with the neighbor, and unbeknownst to you, the neighbor has a boyfriend that's a child molester, and something happens at that house because the owner, right, wasn't watching or doing what they should have done, they have immunity. Blanket immunity. Yep.
Done.
If your child, if you goes over to the neighbor's house and there is
A big party,
right? High school, cool mom at the high school that looks the other way while the kids are all having a party downstairs in the basement. And even if she sees them bringing in a keg, literally, and 2 kids die of alcohol overdose, blanket immunity. If you're letting your kids stay with a daycare in a home and your toddler somehow gets a hold of fentanyl.
meth. I'm like meth.
Yeah, and the blanket immunity for anything that happens if it wasn't as long as it wasn't your meth.
Yeah.
Right. If somebody in your house had dropped it and you didn't pick it up or wasn't cleaning it. I mean,
But nobody is really like. We've listened to hours and hours and hours of testimony, and we've really gotten into a lot of these issues of problems, even with like the bifurcating of trials, and nobody's really picked up on that negligent security thing. I think they're starting to pay attention a little bit more now, or is it still just off the radar and they're like, I'm sure it'll be fine. That probably is not how the courts are going to interpret it. And we're like, pay attention, man.
I think it kind of got off of everybody's radar because those are not really cases that people take a lot of times when something tragic or crazy like that happens, right? When somebody lets their kid go over to the neighbors and the boyfriend molests the kid, as soon as the family gets a lawyer and they send a letter to the homeowner's insurance, right?
It's settled.
They pay it.
Right.
There's no trial. There's not very rarely even a case filed.
Right.
So, because homeowner's insurance usually is not that high, and if something that bad has happened, homeowner's insurance just pays it. Now, literally, it takes out a whole entire section. My interpretation of the bill also is that if you are overserved at a bar and the bar doesn't cut you off, lets you get in the car and drive, and you run over somebody in the parking lot, they have immunity, complete immunity, because
Explain really fast the dram shop type cases, just briefly.
So in Georgia, if a bar overserves somebody and lets them drive and they kill somebody, the bar can be liable. Okay.
And the bar usually has much bigger pockets.
Much more money than a
right. And usually has insurance. And because of this, they actually will cut you off now because this exists and it used to not exist. And so, you try to go and get more than 3 or 4 drinks somewhere, even now, within a certain time frame. And so bartenders are actually trained and waitresses are trained so that they know, hey, if you see somebody who is visibly intoxicated or they've had more than a certain amount of drinks, we could be liable if they drive out of here and they hurt somebody. It gives blanket immunity to any injury that happens off the premises. So as soon as you get in the car and you drive off, typically under now you would have you'd potentially be liable. Now, this has a blanket immunity for any injury that happens off the premises for a wrongful conduct that starts on your premises. So those are
So they're overserved, drive off, kill a family of 4, and it's like, I really can't come after us again.
Yeah. And what's been one of the issues I think with the bill is that there has been so much language in it that is so broad, and there are some real questions from an interpretation standpoint. I mean, reasonable lawyers can read this 18 pages and really struggle to agree on what it means. And that's not unusual. That's why we have
It's also kind of by design.
But sure. Mm-hmm. And I think that what we're looking at is a bill that, if passed, would probably take 10 years or so before the dust would settle and we would know what in here is even constitutional and not constitutional. What is this even, a lot of this language is so broad, what does it even mean? I mean, one of the issues is that in the premises cases, it says you can't even bring a case unless you, as the owner, knew what the third party was thinking. right?
Which is, you're not going to know that, right? Like, that's not actually.
It is literally, physically impossible. I mean, there's things about here that unless you know the time, location of where the imminent wrongful conduct's going to happen, and that you had a conscious basis to believe what they were going to do, I mean, that it would never happen.
And so really fast, this also happened in Florida, right? And Trump came out fully against it, saying, President Trump, this was, it was during his first term, it was like, you're gutting this for the American people in Florida and their, right to trial by jury. And he was right. So why is Kemp doing this? Do you have any, besides the fact, okay, that's a loaded question, besides the fact that there's donor issues.
I think here was what I want to say about that. I think that there is
political aspiration issues.
Maybe. I think folks, business owners, it is true that as just like everything else in the country, inflation has gone up with everything. The fact that milk is higher, gas is higher,
eggs,
everything.
Not the damn eggs.
Insurance to get insurance to cover your business has gone up as well. Now, if you don't have certain policies and procedures in place and checks and balances in places, that inevitably opens up your exposure potentially to a lawsuit. And I think some of those smaller organizations, are paying more in premiums than they used to pay, right? Because there has been some after COVID, everything got higher. So it's not that there's been this runaway verdicts, but when they have gotten popped, they've been significant for good reason. Almost always. I mean, I don't know of a single case that there's no hot coffee cases, right? These are all, they talk about
the hot coffee case was not, in fact, a hot coffee case.
Right.
Yeah.
This exactly. But these are all deaths. These are deaths, multiple deaths, people who are quadriplegic. I mean, these are serious ones, and you hear about the big ones. So
obviously we don't have that many days before this is potentially going to become an actual law. What can our listeners do that are hearing this right now are like, I am not okay with this? Mm-hmm. What can people do now in the next 3 or 4 days?
Call. So every one of us has a state senator, and we all have a state representative. Both. You can literally Google who's my state senator, who's my state House representative, and in Georgia, and call them and just say, an intern will answer the phone. Hi, this is Senator Smith's office, and say, hey, my name is Natalie. I live in Senator Smith's district, and I would like him to vote no on Senate Bill 68.
Extraordinarily concerned by some of the things I've read.
And that's it. I mean, that really is, at the end of the day, it's not a hard ask. All we can do, and really it's for the benefit of the representatives and the senators too. They're hearing from a lot of different voices. They're hearing from their constituents that are business owners. They're hearing from their constituents that are insurance agents. They're hearing, and when
lobbyists for insurance companies.
Right. Well, here's what you don't get told. If you're a business and you go to your insurance agent and you say, "Why did my premiums go up this year?" What he's not going to say is, because we wanted to give our CEO his
a bigger bonus,
5% pay increase.
Right. He needed his PJ.
Right. They're not going to say, we're really pushing to make profits larger this year than last year, which is true for every business. They're not going to tell you that. What they're going to tell you is another reason. Not that it's the real reason. But
runaway juries.
It's the plaintiff's lawyer. It's the juries. It's this. And so what do? You then, as the property owner, go to your politician and say, I need help with this. And my agent just told me the problem was here. So they believe them. And then a lot of the politicians do, they believe that. And so a lot of it, I think, is, at the end of the day, the core is misinformation. And so that's why we're here.
And so when people call, do they need to give a reason, or can they just say, please vote no for Senate Bill 68?
Yep.
That's all they have to say.
And they really are just taking that information down and
keep tallying
it. Yeah. Okay. And be able to tell.
Yes, no.
Yeah,
yes,
we got 50 calls today, or we got 100 calls today. And that's really the extent of what you can do.
So can people call every day? Like, is it just once, or can you call?
You can call them as much as you want to call.
Okay.
What did I see this great meme that was like, instead of drunk dialing your exes, drunk dial your senators and your House reps?
But look, I think that what I've learned from just being part of this process is that there are, the great majority of folks who are down at the Capitol are well-meaning and want to do the right thing and are trying to balance a lot of different interests and a lot of different factors and a lot of different experiences. And I think something will pass for sure. My hope is that we can find some ways to make some compromises in some areas that I think where the bill is just pat land fair. I think that if we can make some compromises like that, I do think that kind of it can be a win for the business community. It can be a win for Governor Kemp, and that's a good thing, right? There are some legitimate points on the other side, but I think the overreach or getting too far afield is where we start getting to a point that we're kind of throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for coming in. This was super helpful.
Thank you. We wanted to do a very quick, informational session so everybody can get out there and hear about it. And so this was Natalie Woodward. We love her. She's a brilliant plaintiff's lawyer, and she's on the executive committee for Georgia Trial Lawyers Association. Will be president one day. Love her for that. So please call your senators. Please call your state reps. Do all of that. Vote no on Senate Bill 68. It is a train wreck the way that it is currently written, and I think that the unintended consequences of it will really shake the hell out of the legal system for the next decade if we don't get some of the tweaks that we desperately need. So
thank you.
All right.
Thanks for joining us. So we will see you next time on Lawyers and Libations. We will have more libations and more just funny jackass stories like we usually have, but we wanted this information session done as quickly as possible. So thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.